The village of Oberammergau, nestled deep in the Bavarian Alps, had always been a quiet place, wrapped in fog and folklore. Life moved slowly there, as it had for generations. But on the night of November 6, 1873, something happened that would forever disturb the natural rhythm of that timeless village. It began with a strange light in the sky, described by the few who saw it as a pulse of silver-blue radiance that split the clouds and hovered unmoving over the forested hills. At precisely the same moment, thunder rolled through the valley, though no storm followed, and every clock in the village stopped ticking. The silence that followed was heavier than snow. That night, Emma Richter was born. Her mother, Lisa Richter, had gone into labor 2 weeks early. Her screams brought neighbors to the door, but no one could explain what happened next. According to the midwife, the birthing room grew cold enough to fog breath, despite the roaring fire. The oil lamps flickered and died, leaving only moonlight filtering through the window. And then a blinding blue glow emanated from behind the closed door. Those inside swore they felt a pressure in the air, like standing too close to a thunderstorm. When Emma was finally delivered, she did not cry. She did not breathe. The midwife, trembling, declared her stillborn. But Liese clutched the child tightly to her chest, whispering prayers through tears. For almost a full minute, the room held its breath until, without warning, the baby gasped, her eyes snapping open. Not hazel or green like her parents, but a pale, almost luminous gray. They glowed faintly in the dark like wet stone under moonlight. She did not wail. She simply stared. From that moment forward, the whispers began. The village priest, Father Anselm, was the first to visit the Richters after Emma's birth. He claimed the child was marked, pointing to an odd silvery birthmark at the base of her neck. Shaped like a broken ring, it shimmered faintly when touched. Father Anselm begged Liese to baptize the child immediately, warning of omens and curses. The ceremony was performed the next morning, but even the church candles flickered out during the final blessing. Liese and her husband Karl tried to laugh it off, but they were not foolish people. Something had shifted. Emma was no ordinary child. In the weeks that followed, her behavior only deepened the villagers' unease. Emma never cried at night. She seemed to sleep with her eyes open. Animals reacted strangely in her presence. Dogs whined and backed away. Cats bolted. Birds went silent when she passed. By 3 months old, she was mimicking sounds she couldn't possibly understand. The creak of doors, the whistle of wind, even human words spoken just once in her hearing. Her mother insisted she was just gifted, maybe blessed. But the villagers had other words: changeling, spirit-born, touched by the other world. Emma's parents, fearing the rumors, began to withdraw. They stopped attending Mass. They stopped answering questions. But strange things continued to happen around their home. Glasses shattered for no reason. Furniture shifted. Neighbors reported flashes of bluish light through the windows at night. One boy, a local shepherd, swore he saw Emma, just a baby, standing alone in the garden at dawn, humming a tune in a language he couldn't understand. By her first birthday, doctors from Munich had already heard rumors of a child untouched by natural law. One wrote in his journal, later discovered decades afterward, "The Richter child is unsettling. She is alert beyond what can be explained. Her gaze is not that of a baby. It is the gaze of something waiting." Emma Richter's birth was never officially documented by the state, not properly. The family's original record vanished in a fire that consumed part of the town hall the year after. A replacement was filed, but it bore a different date, and the midwife who delivered her had left the village abruptly, never to return. The people of Oberammergau spoke less and less of that strange November night, the silver light, the broken clocks, the stillborn breath that reversed itself. They became legend, softened over time. But for those who were there, who saw the girl with the glowing eyes and felt the air pressure change when she entered a room, Emma was not just a child. She was a question. A question science would soon try to answer. By the time Emma Richter was 4 years old, it was clear to everyone in her village that something was not quite ordinary about her. Unlike other children, she didn't speak her first words gradually or clumsily. One afternoon, she simply sat upright at the family table and recited, in perfect Latin, a line from an old Roman manuscript her father, an amateur historian, kept sealed in a locked trunk. No one in the house spoke Latin. Her mother fainted. Her father demanded to know who had taught her, but Emma only stared at him blankly, as if unaware she had said anything strange. The oddities did not stop there. She learned to read within days, not months, and seemed to require no instruction. Her father would often find her standing barefoot in the snow, unmoving, her eyes wide open, murmuring numbers no one could understand. Once she wrote a sequence of symbols on the walls of her room, circles inside triangles, spiral patterns intersected by jagged lines. A mathematician who happened to be passing through the region was invited to examine the drawings. After studying them for a night, he reportedly packed up his belongings and left without saying a word, refusing to discuss what he'd seen. Emma had no formal schooling, but by age 7, she was solving puzzles published in academic journals her father received by mail. She could read upside down as fast as any adult could from the right side up, and she once recited backwards the entire content of a book after hearing it read aloud just once. Her parents, increasingly unnerved, tried to limit her access to books and letters. In response, she began writing equations in the dirt outside their home. Formulas neither of her parents recognized, symbols that wouldn't be found in European mathematics for another 40 years. Perhaps most unnerving were the physical phenomena. Emma never appeared cold, even during the harsh Bavarian winters, walking barefoot across frozen fields without so much as a sniffle. She didn't cast a shadow on particularly cloudy days, and on more than one occasion, villagers claimed to see frost forming around her rather than on her. A glass of water would freeze solid if left near her bedside overnight, even if the room was warm. When asked about these things, Emma offered no explanation. She didn't appear curious about her talents, nor proud. If anything, she seemed weary, like someone too old for the body she inhabited. Her presence began to divide the village. Some feared her and believed she was possessed, the product of some dark bargain or ancient curse. Others treated her like a saint, believing God had sent her for a purpose they could not yet understand. Her parents, though, could neither embrace her fully nor renounce her completely. They vacillated between awe and fear, pride and panic, desperate to keep her hidden while also hoping someone, somewhere, could explain what she was. The first outsider to take serious notice was Professor Wilhelm Kreutz, a physicist from the University of Berlin. He had heard rumors of the unnatural child of Garching and arrived with skepticism. But after witnessing Emma light a lantern with a touch of her fingertip, he wrote in his journal that science has met its silence. He convinced the family to allow him to bring Emma to the capital, promising care, education, and answers. But more than that, he wanted to see what would happen if Emma were placed near machines, laboratories, and minds that might finally understand her. On the day of her departure, the village church bell rang at the wrong hour, tolling 13 times just as Emma stepped into the professor's carriage. It wasn't until years later that anyone thought to question whether it was an accident or a warning. Emma Richter left Garching behind, but the mystery of her nature was only beginning to unfold. By the time Emma Richter turned 10, whispers of her inexplicable abilities had stretched well beyond the narrow cobblestone lanes of her Bavarian village. What began as hushed gossip among neighbors, tales of a girl who could recite ancient texts she had never seen, who never fell ill, and who caused compasses to spin wildly when she approached, soon grew into national curiosity. The local pastor, unnerved by her presence during Mass, had once claimed that candles dimmed whenever she prayed. Word of her spread like wildfire, traveling from wandering merchants to university scholars, until it reached the halls of Berlin's scientific elite. It was a cold November morning when Emma and her mother were summoned to the capital under the pretense of academic evaluation. In truth, it was much more than that. A select committee of physicists, neurologists, and theologians, many of them men whose names filled the pages of scientific journals, had gathered in anticipation. They were not prepared for what they found. Emma was neither boastful nor shy. She entered the Berlin laboratory, a cavernous room of gas lamps and polished brass instruments, with a calm detachment that unnerved even the most skeptical of minds. She answered their questions with clarity beyond her years. When asked to identify obscure equations from Newtonian mechanics, she corrected the professor's chalk error mid-sentence, having never been taught mathematics formally. She recited verbatim an untranslated passage from an ancient Sanskrit manuscript, claiming she had seen the words in a dream. When confronted with these claims, a Sanskrit scholar present paled. His copy of the passage had never left the confines of the university library. Tests followed, both rudimentary and cutting-edge for their time. Electrodes were attached to her temples, primitive galvanometers used to chart her brain activity. No recognizable patterns emerged. Her readings bore no resemblance to anything previously documented. Physicians tried measuring her reflexes and heartbeat under stress. Both remained curiously constant, as if her body didn't register fear or excitement the way others did. Then came the more unusual episodes. On the fourth day, as Emma sat silently in a padded observation room, a steel tuning fork placed nearby inexplicably rang out. No one had touched it. On another occasion, a thick glass beaker on a high shelf cracked cleanly down the middle just as Emma had turned her gaze toward it. The scientists began arguing. Some claimed coincidence, others demanded more tests. One doctor insisted it was a case of hysteria combined with photic suggestion, though no one could explain how mere suggestion had warped matter. Emma, for her part, seemed disengaged from the circus surrounding her. She answered questions when asked, performed tasks when instructed, but never volunteered anything. Her expressions rarely changed, and she spoke with the calm of someone watching events from far away. Her presence unsettled many, even as they became increasingly obsessed with documenting her every move. Soon, Emma's story became a matter of public fascination. Articles in Berlin's papers called her Das Mädchen, das die Wissenschaft spaltet, the girl who divides science. A woodcut of her face, surrounded by flames and equations, was printed in popular pamphlets. Crowds began gathering outside the university, hoping to catch a glimpse of the child who defied explanation. Some called her a miracle, others a curse. There were even clergy who quietly pressed for her to be exorcised. Yet amid the swelling interest, the core problem remained. No theory held. Hypotheses rose and fell weekly. Was she a biological anomaly? A fraud with prodigious memory? A spiritual medium? Each new test only deepened the mystery. A leading biologist who observed her sessions remarked, "It is not what she does that unsettles me, but the sense that our instruments are simply not designed to measure what she is." Inevitably, tensions flared within the research team. Some advocated for more invasive procedures, lumbar punctures, sleep deprivation studies, and sensory isolation. Others warned that such methods bordered on cruelty. Emma, still a child, was growing visibly weary. Her mother, once timid and awestruck, began to resist the team's authority, demanding that her daughter be left alone. But it was too late. Emma's presence had become too valuable, too dangerous, too profitable for curiosity to simply walk away. What no one realized was that Emma had already begun to understand the nature of her captivity, and quietly, imperceptibly, she was preparing to leave it behind. As Emma grew older, the fascination surrounding her deepened into something more unsettling. No longer merely the subject of awe or distant admiration, she became an obsession for many in the scientific community, an enigma they believed must be unraveled at any cost. By the time she turned 14, Emma was no longer a girl with mysterious talents. She was an object of study, a problem to be solved, a challenge to human understanding. The laboratories in Berlin where Emma was housed bore little resemblance to classrooms or places of learning. They were cold, clinical spaces filled with sharp instruments, thick notebooks, and men who rarely addressed her as anything other than the subject. Emma sat for hours beneath harsh lamps, her skin pricked with needles to measure nerve responses. Her eyes tracked as she read incomprehensible texts in languages she claimed not to know, yet recited perfectly. Electric currents were applied to her skin while researchers recorded her expressions. Her meals were rationed and observed. At night, even her dreams were monitored. She had a tendency to whisper in languages long dead or, on rare nights, cause small objects in the room to move without touch. Though some among the staff treated her with kindness, an assistant who slipped her sweets when the doctors weren't looking, or a nurse who once dared to brush a curl behind her ear, most did not regard her as fully human. "She doesn't feel pain like we do," one researcher argued during a meeting. "She can recover faster. Her brain isn't structured like ours. So why should we adhere to ordinary moral constraints?" Emma's body began to change, subtly but undeniably. Her eyes, already unnaturally pale, began to reflect light oddly, like polished metal. Her skin seemed to resist bruising, even when mishandled. The scientists recorded these anomalies with fevered excitement, and the experiments grew harsher. She was forced into sensory deprivation chambers for days. Her reactions to extreme temperatures were tested. Loud, disorienting sounds were blasted into her room to measure her resilience, and through it all, Emma rarely cried out. She spoke little, but when she did, it was often unsettling. "This will not hold forever," she once said quietly to a physician after a long, painful procedure. "You're measuring something you cannot cage." A quiet rebellion stirred within the institute. Some younger staff members, unnerved by the cruelty masked as scientific rigor, began to question the ethics of the project. One young doctor, Heinrich Keller, kept a secret journal of the procedures performed on Emma and began sneaking her books and journals, small gestures of respect for her mind, if not her condition. It was through these secret writings that much of what we now know about the experimentation on Emma has survived. Yet despite these acts of quiet defiance, the momentum of the institution was too great. Funding poured in from across Europe. Prominent scholars and physicians arrived from Paris, Vienna, and even St. Petersburg to observe her. Each new observer came with a theory. Emma was a missing link in evolution, a manifestation of latent psychic potential, a divine punishment, or a glimpse into a future humanity. They debated her classification endlessly. Not one asked her what she felt. Her silence grew heavier with each passing month, not from ignorance or fear, but from refusal. Emma stopped performing when asked, stopped answering their riddles and tests. Instruments malfunctioned in her presence. Ink spilled without cause, lights flickered and shattered, and those who pressed her too hard suffered strange accidents. Minor ones at first. Broken fingers, lost sleep, hallucinations, then more severe. It became evident to a few that Emma was no longer just responding to her environment. She was reshaping it. But this realization came too late for the Institute. The turning point came one winter evening when the staff arrived to find Emma gone. No door was forced, no window broken. Her restraints were still locked. The only sign of her was a single phrase burned into the wall above her cot. What you sought to explain, you only imprisoned. From that night forward, the records end abruptly. The Institute itself, which once prided itself on scientific glory, shuddered within the year, discredited and silenced by what it could neither control nor comprehend. As Emma Richter moved into adolescence, the nature of her abilities became not only more pronounced, but far less predictable. At first, her strange gifts, what the scientists once thought were anomalies of genius or freaks of biology, grew in scale but remained rooted in the observable world. She could mimic languages after hearing them once, rearrange metallic instruments without touching them, or predict the exact contents of sealed letters and boxes. But by her 14th year, the line between the physical and the abstract began to blur. Time, space, and even memory seemed to bend around her. In the tightly secured chambers of the Berlin Institute for Physical Phenomena, Emma underwent near-daily tests. At first, the physicians approached her with awe. They thought her mind would unlock truths they had yet to discover. But over time, their wonder twisted into anxiety. Emma was no longer just a subject. They began to fear her. In one infamous incident, Dr. Albrecht Hauser, a physicist known for his empirical rigor, claimed he saw a future version of himself reflected in Emma's eyes, older, disfigured, and clearly mad. Days later, he left the Institute and was never seen again. Emma's presence itself seemed to influence the minds of those around her. Sleep disorders spread through the facility. People reported vivid, shared dreams, visions of cities not yet built, maps of stars that didn't match any current charts, and words in languages no one could translate. Devices stopped working in her vicinity. Clocks turned backward. Candle flames flickered blue and rose upward instead of dancing with gravity. And always at the center stood Emma, silent, watchful, not malicious, but somehow unreachable. The ethics board grew divided. Some believed Emma was a miracle, a bridge between science and the divine, and that her abilities should be nurtured carefully. Others called her a threat to rational progress, a black hole into which reason itself collapsed. When they placed her under forced sedation in an attempt to suppress her abilities and measure her consciousness in a resting state, the consequences were catastrophic. Instruments shattered. One nurse, Elise Brandt, later described a moment where the entire world outside the Institute ceased to exist. No sound, no movement. Only Emma's pulse, and then darkness. It lasted only seconds, but it left a permanent silence in the minds of those present, like something had been removed. Emma never lashed out. She never spoke of revenge. But something in her changed. Her eyes, once expressive and curious, grew distant. She stopped responding to stimuli, stopped asking questions, and simply watched. Her caregivers tried to record her brain waves, but the devices gave nonsense readings, symbols, not numbers, sometimes even musical notations. The lead neurologist thought it was a joke. Then he too vanished after claiming he had heard Emma whisper to him in his sleep. One night in the autumn of 1887, the Institute fell eerily quiet. Staff who lived nearby reported that all the lamps in the building extinguished at once. The next morning, every lock in the facility was found open, every door ajar. Emma was gone. They searched the grounds, the train stations, even the forests along the riverbanks. No trace, no tracks, no footprints, no evidence of escape or abduction. The security logs ended with a single sentence typed on a machine no longer connected to ink or power. She is where we cannot follow. In the years that followed, rumors spread of a girl, then a young woman, seen in photographs from places far apart and years ahead of her known age. Sometimes she appeared in the background of group shots taken in France, Russia, or England, always the same. Not older, not different, simply unchanged. The records of the Berlin Institute were seized by the Imperial Cabinet and quietly buried. To the public, Emma Richter became a myth, a cautionary tale of scientific hubris. But in whispered circles of academia, she was still studied, still sought. The girl's science couldn't explain never returned, but neither did the world fully recover from the questions she left behind. In the years that followed Emma Richter's disappearance, the world changed, but her story clung to the margins of science and myth like a stubborn stain on the fabric of reason. The institute that once housed her, the Berlin Institute for Human Advancement, was shut down in 1887 after a fire consumed its western wing. Officially, the cause was listed as faulty electrical wiring. Unofficially, survivors spoke of books that burned without flames and clocks that spun wildly before freezing mid-tick. The researchers who once claimed to unlock Emma's mind had vanished or refused to speak. Some went mad. Others simply left their posts, resigned in silence. For decades, Emma Richter became little more than an obscure footnote in European scientific archives, until 1921, when a graduate student from Heidelberg stumbled upon a sealed crate in the cellar of a long-abandoned university annex. Inside were yellowed files, handwritten journals, fragments of old EEG readings, and anatomical sketches, none conforming to human biology. Most chilling of all was a charcoal drawing of a girl with sunken eyes, a wild braid of hair down her back, and a hand pressed flat against what looked like a window pane. But the reflection staring back wore a different expression. The journals chronicled her time in Berlin, including details that had never been made public. One entry described an experiment in which Emma was exposed to alternating frequencies of sound and light. Rather than reacting with distress or confusion, she reportedly wept, not in pain, but in a strange state of longing, uttering words in an unrecorded tongue that left one assistant trembling for days. Another entry revealed that Emma had stopped aging by the time she was 15. Her skin remained smooth and unmarred, her hair unchanged. Her voice deepened not with age, but with density, as though gravity itself bent closer to her each time she spoke. Stories began to surface across Europe. In 1934, a nurse in Vienna swore that a young woman, identical to a girl in an old medical sketch, wandered into her hospital during a blackout, healed a dying patient with a touch, and vanished before the lights returned. A decade later, during the Second World War, German officers spoke of a girl who passed unharmed through artillery zones, whispering in the ears of soldiers seconds before they surrendered or fled. She wore a long coat, said nothing, and never looked back. Scientists dismissed these accounts as folklore, wartime hysteria, or misidentification. But some saw patterns. In every account, the woman appeared young, always between 16 and 20. She moved silently, left no trace, and was often linked to moments of inexplicable peace amid violence, or unexplained anomalies, flickering lights, reversed wounds, a sudden shift in air pressure. By the 1960s, Emma had entered urban legend. Conspiracy theorists called her the girl outside time. Occultists believed she was a vessel of ancient knowledge, a bridge between worlds. But deeper within the scientific community, a few stubborn researchers pursued her trail in secret. Among them was Dr. Anneliese Koenig, a physicist who had grown up hearing her grandfather's quiet recollections of the Berlin Institute before it burned. In 1972, Koenig compiled a dossier cross-referencing testimonies from multiple decades, aligning them with geomagnetic irregularities, unseasonal weather, and subtle electromagnetic pulses recorded on global monitors. What emerged was a pattern too precise to dismiss. Emma was not omnipresent, but she was not random. Her appearances followed some rhythm, possibly tidal or astronomical. Koenig theorized that Emma was not simply a girl with gifts, but a fixed point in a universe of variables, an anomaly who should not exist, and yet persistently did. She proposed that Emma might not even be aging in the traditional sense, but slipping through a latticework of time, re-entering when certain conditions aligned. In 1991, a final entry was added to Koenig's dossier. It was a grainy photo taken by a geologist in southern Norway. A woman, back turned to the camera, stood at the edge of a frozen lake. She wore a simple wool dress. A braid ran down her back. In the reflection of the ice, her face was visible, calm, unblinking, untouched by time. To this day, no scientific explanation accounts for Emma Richter. No body was ever found, no death recorded. All that remains are fragments, documents, drawings, whispers, and the lingering unease that somewhere out there a girl still walks between the cracks in reality.